Welcome to Karma Chronicles. Please like the video and subscribe. Let's begin. I was dreading the long weekend. It wasn't just the drive to the lake house. It was the feeling of being stuck in a time loop where I was always 18, always the screw-up in my family's eyes. Every year, I packed the same casserole, my mom's recipe, and braced myself for another round of polite but cutting comments. It was almost like clockwork. Dad would ask if I was getting anywhere with my career, Eric would start talking about his latest aerospace project, and Claire would suggest I look into a real job, maybe in city government, because it had pensions. I wasn't sure why I still went, except that family was family, no matter how much they made me feel like I was just waiting for my turn to screw things up. Vanessa, my assistant, kept urging me to skip the trip. "It's not worth it," she'd said. "Just send them the casserole and stay home." But I knew I couldn't. I didn't want to be the one who was missing from the table, the one who couldn't make it because I was too busy being too successful to deal with the people who didn't even know the half of it. I had worked hard, very hard, to get to where I was, and yet I could already hear their voices in my head, calling me everything but what I was. The founder and CEO of Ironclad Tech Logistics, a growing tech company that had just broken $10 million in revenue. Instead, they'd always see me as the dispatcher. I clicked off the email I was drafting for Vanessa, grabbed the casserole dish, and left my downtown condo behind. The cool air of late summer wrapped around me as I hit the road, leaving the city's hum behind, already bracing for what was to come. I pulled up to the lake house just as the sun started to dip behind the trees, casting a warm, golden light over everything. My mom was already waiting on the porch, a hand on her hip, scanning the parking lot like I was 5 minutes late, like always. "Good Lord, Lisa, you look run down," she said, peering at me from the steps. Her eyes weren't full of concern. It was more like she was stating a fact, like I hadn't slept in days and was barely holding it together. I gave her a tight smile, not bothering to explain that I'd been running on too many hours of a different kind of work than she could possibly understand. "Long week," I said, grabbing the casserole dish out of the car. Her eyes flicked to the casserole, then back to me. Smells good. You sure you're eating enough? You look like you haven't gained an ounce since high school." I nodded, the familiar sting crawling up my neck. "I'm fine, Mom." Eric and Claire were already in the living room, seated on opposite sides of the room, deep into some conversation I had no desire to join. Eric was talking animatedly, as usual, about his work at the aerospace firm. He always had something big to brag about, his latest project or bonus, like his entire life was a constant up and to the right chart of success. And Claire, of course, was playing the role of the serious, successful lawyer, tossing out terms like merger and promotion with ease. They both looked up when I walked in, but the acknowledgement was quick, like I was just another part of the scenery. "Hey, Lisa," Claire said with a cool smile. "How's that warehouse job treating you?" I didn't respond right away, just set the casserole down on the counter and grabbed a beer. If I answered her, it would just be more of the same. "Fine," I said finally, my voice tight, and dropped down onto the couch next to Eric. Eric didn't miss a beat. "Still doing the scheduling thing?" "Yeah," I muttered, taking a swig of my beer and staring straight ahead. Claire didn't even flinch. "I just don't get it, Liz. I mean, you're smart, you've always been driven, but is there any real career growth in that? I just don't see how answering phones and managing shipments gets you anywhere long term." I knew it was coming, but hearing it still felt like a punch to the gut. Claire always spoke in that detached, clinical way, like she was talking about someone she didn't really care about but felt obligated to analyze. Before I could think of something to say, my dad stepped in, bringing the conversation back to his usual track. "You know, Lisa," he started, his voice dripping with that tone of supposed wisdom, "you could always look into a civil service job. Good pension, steady pay, something reliable." I wanted to snap, to tell him that a pension wasn't my idea of reliable or secure, but instead I stayed quiet, just nodding along. It was easier that way. Claire, ever the one to keep poking, turned to me with her eyebrows raised. "Don't you want something more? A law firm or some kind of tech job with room to move up?" I didn't even know how to respond to that. The thought of them thinking I worked in some entry-level dispatch job for some random warehouse company while I was running a multi-million-dollar business, while I had investors and clients counting on me, it felt like I was wearing someone else's life like a costume. Mom, thankfully, changed the subject for a minute, asking Eric about his bonus. I sank into the couch, letting the hum of their conversation wash over me, but none of it felt like it was directed at me. I was invisible, the quiet one who could disappear into the background of their well-practiced lives. It was exhausting, like having to hold my breath and wait for them to remember I was even in the room. Dinner was the same routine. My mom's casseroles, Eric and Claire swapping success stories, Dad offering helpful advice that no one asked for. The whole thing felt like a play, with me in the role of the failure. My family had no idea who I really was or what I had actually built. They didn't see the late nights, the hustle, the countless hours spent making something that actually mattered. Instead, they saw what they wanted to see, the daughter who'd gotten stuck at the warehouse. It took all I had not to laugh bitterly when Claire tossed out, "I just think you should do something with more potential. You could get into something with real career advancement." As I picked up my food, I realized, yet again, that they would never get it. Dinner dragged on, the clink of silverware the only sound as I pushed my food around my plate. The casserole was a little dry, but I didn't care. The conversation, however, was the same tired loop. My dad kept glancing over at me between bites, like he was waiting for me to give him something to latch onto, something that would make sense to him. "You know, Lisa," he started, setting his fork down with a sigh, "you've really wasted your 20s." I froze, the words slicing through the fog in my head. "Wasted," he repeated, like he was trying to make sure I heard it. Like it wasn't just the dinner conversation, but a lecture I needed to listen to. "You had all this time, and now look at you, still in that job. You need to get serious. Get a real career before it's too late. Time doesn't wait for anyone." The muscles in my jaw tightened, but I didn't respond. There was no point. He'd said it 100 times before, over the phone, at family gatherings, and in passing. His tone was the same as always, a mix of disappointment and tough love. Eric, ever the supportive older brother, jumped in, leaning back in his chair like he was just stating the obvious. "If you actually applied yourself, you could probably make supervisor at the warehouse. I'm sure they'd give you a shot if you really tried." Supervisor. Jesus. That's how they saw me. Still stuck at the bottom, still answering calls and making schedules, forever the underachiever in their eyes. The weight of it sat like a brick in my stomach. I cut a piece of my meat, slow and deliberate, the fork scraping against the plate. I was trying not to let the frustration show, but it was hard. "You know, sweetie," my mom piped in, glancing at me with that same worried look, "maybe you should talk to a career counselor. They can help you figure out what's next, give you some direction." A career counselor. God. I could barely hold in a laugh, like there was some magic solution to fix me, to turn me into one of their successful kids. She smiled at me, all warm and motherly, as if she was offering me some grand piece of advice that I hadn't already heard. Claire chimed in too, trying to be helpful in her own way, but I could tell she wasn't really seeing me, just the idea of me. "I could help you polish up your resume. It's just a few tweaks, really. You could probably get a good office job in a couple weeks if you put your mind to it." They all waited for me to respond, to nod, to smile, to tell them that I was ready to make my life better, to finally give them what they wanted to hear. But I didn't say anything. I just kept cutting my food, slowly, carefully, feeling the tightness in my chest. Finally, after what felt like hours, I spoke. It came out quietly, but firm. "I've been thinking about making some changes." The silence that followed was thick. It was like they couldn't quite decide whether that was a hopeful answer or just another one of my empty promises. Eric's eyebrows shot up. "Really? Like what kind of changes?" I took a deep breath. They didn't get it. They never had. And it wasn't like I was about to start explaining it to them. They wouldn't understand if I did. "I don't know yet," I said, putting my fork down and finally looking them all in the eye. "But I'm not where I want to be, and I'm not going to stay there." It wasn't a promise exactly. It was just a truth I was finally allowing myself to say out loud. And somehow, I could see that they all took it as a sign of hope. Like this was the moment I'd finally get back on track. Like this was the moment they'd been waiting for. Claire smiled like she'd just heard the magic words. "That's great, Lisa. I knew you'd come around. We're just trying to help you, you know?" My mom nodded, relieved, like I'd just taken some weight off her shoulders. "Maybe you should look into something steady, just to get your foot in the door. You could always go back to school too. You never know." Yeah, I never knew. That's the problem. I wasn't looking for another job or a different resume or some damn civil service exam, but they wouldn't hear that, so I just nodded, offering the kind of smile I'd perfected over the years, the one that didn't mean anything but quiet compliance. "Thanks," I said, knowing they'd take it as progress. But all I could think about was how far I had come and how they still had no idea. I left the lake house early the next morning, the weight of my family's comments still sitting heavy in my chest. The drive back to the city was a blur of thoughts, but mostly it was the dull, gnawing feeling that I'd never fully shake off being the black sheep. It didn't matter that I had a billion-dollar company. I was always going to be their underachiever. When I finally made it back to my condo, the view from the top floor was still breathtaking. Downtown spread out before me like a glowing map of everything I had built, and everything I was still building. The glass walls of my place gave me a perfect view of the skyline, but right now, they felt more like a reminder that I was still trying to separate myself from everything that came before. The sound of my phone ringing pulled me out of my thoughts. It was Vanessa, my assistant, checking in on the weekend. I muted the call, not ready to dive into small talk. Instead, I dialed into the conference call I'd scheduled with my legal director, Peter, and my CFO, Grace. "Good morning," I said, forcing myself to sound casual. "Let's get this over the finish line." Peter's voice came through first, always measured, always professional. "We're set for Monday morning, right? The press release is lined up?" "Right," I confirmed. "We go live at 10 a.m. Markets open shortly after. We can't afford any slip-ups. The release has to be perfect." Grace jumped in, her tone sharp. "Everything's in place from our end. We've got the paperwork ready for final approval. We're good to go." I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. This deal, this was it. Hawkfield Transport Solutions, a $2.2 billion acquisition. My largest to date, 6 months in the making. I'd originally come on board as a consultant to help them streamline their operations, but it didn't take long for me to realize their entire business model was bloated. Their systems were outdated, inefficient. They needed Ironclad's logistics software, and they needed it bad. My dad, who had worked there for over 30 years, still had no idea this was coming. Hawkfield's workforce, the one he'd been a part of for so long, would be getting the news the same time the public did. A small part of me felt guilty about it, but the other part, my business mind, the part that made me build Ironclad from nothing, knew this was the right move. Hawkfield's inefficiencies were dragging them under. It wasn't personal, it was business. "Good. I'll sign the final docs this afternoon," I said, shifting my position to lean back in the chair and look out over the city. "Let's make sure we're ready for the fallout. Some of these guys are going to be pissed. They'll find out at the same time as everyone else. I don't need any leaks." "Understood," Grace replied. "I've already set up calls with the HR department to discuss integration plans," Peter added. "We're all aligned on how to handle the transition smoothly." "Perfect," I said. "One last thing. We've got to ensure Hawkfield's key leaders understand we're not coming in to disrupt their operations for the sake of it. We're streamlining, not bulldozing." There was a long pause before Grace spoke again. "It's not like you're firing your dad, right?" I nearly choked. The thought hadn't crossed my mind until she said it, but the reality of it hit hard. No, I wasn't coming after my dad. His job was safe, for now. There was a chance his role would evolve, though. There always was when a company got swallowed up. "I'm not coming after him, Grace. I'll make sure he knows that." Peter's voice cut through. "It's going to be a delicate situation with the staff. We've got to keep the internal messaging tight." "Agreed," I said. "Let's stick to the plan. I'll handle the family fallout later." The call ended a few minutes later, but I just sat there, staring out at the city below. I felt the pressure building in my chest. Monday morning would bring the announcement, and my father would be blindsided. He wouldn't see it coming. How could he? All he knew was that I was a dispatcher in his eyes. He had no clue that I owned the very company that was about to take his livelihood, and his longtime coworkers' lives, by storm. I shook my head as if that could shake off the guilt. But this wasn't personal. It wasn't. I had worked too hard to let this moment slip by just because of family. I had a company to run, a future to secure. I glanced back at my phone, seeing the reminder for Monday morning. Press release, Hawkfield acquisition, Ironclad expands. It was done. It was happening. And no matter what, my dad would know who I was then. Monday morning came too fast. I'd barely slept the night before, too busy running through every possible scenario in my head. By 6 a.m., I was already at my desk, watching the pre-market chatter unfold on my screen. My fingers hovered over the keys, but I didn't touch anything. The market was reacting to the upcoming press release. Ironclad's valuation was about to break $10 billion, and the industry was already buzzing. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of my laptop and the occasional ping of incoming emails. I had about 3 hours to go before the world knew what I had just pulled off. Hawkfield Transport Solutions was officially mine. My company was absorbing them whole. The deal had been 6 months in the making, and now it was about to drop like a bomb. I clicked open the draft of the press release for the 100th time. Everything was perfect. At exactly 10 a.m., the press release went live. The notification pinged on my phone almost instantly. My face popped up on industry websites, shaking hands with Hawkfield's former CEO, all smiles, dressed sharp in a tailored suit. The headline wasn't about me or Hawkfield, though. It was about Ironclad. Ironclad Tech Logistics acquires Hawkfield Transport Solutions, expanding reach across North America. Below it, a blurb about how Ironclad's valuation had crossed $10 billion. I leaned back in my chair, staring at my face on the screen, barely able to register what I was reading. It was a strange thing to see, almost like it wasn't real. But it was. The press release had gone live, the deal was done, and now the world would know who I was. I let myself breathe for a second, then my phone rang. I checked the caller ID. It was Dad. I took a deep breath and answered. "Hey, Dad." "Lisa," he said, his voice shaky. "Did you see the email from Hawkfield? They just sent it out, about some buyout. Is that your company involved?" I swallowed, my pulse picking up. He sounded rattled, confused, maybe even a little scared. "Yeah, Dad," I said, calm and collected, even though my chest was tight. "It's us. Ironclad now owns Hawkfield outright." There was a long pause on the other end. My dad, the man who had worked there for over 30 years, didn't say a word for several seconds. He finally broke the silence. But you answer phones. You're just the dispatcher, right?" I froze. His words hit like a punch in the gut. It wasn't the first time he'd said something like that, but this time it stung in a way it hadn't before. He didn't understand. He couldn't possibly understand. "No, Dad," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I haven't been a dispatcher since 2017. Another silence. I could hear the sound of his breath on the other end of the line, slow and measured, like he was trying to process what I was saying. "Lisa," he said finally, his voice trembling. How? How did I not know about this? How did I not know what you were doing all these years?" I was quiet for a moment, not sure how to answer him. How could I explain all of this to him? The years of hustling, of hiding the real work I was doing while I built Ironclad from the ground up. How could I explain that every time I tried to tell him, he just dismissed it? Or worse, never even bothered to listen. "You didn't know because you never asked," I said, my voice tight. It wasn't meant to sound so harsh, but it did. "I tried to tell you. I tried so many times, but you never really listened." He was silent again, and I could hear him trying to process that too. "I thought you were just, I don't know, working your way up at the warehouse. I never thought—" He trailed off, unsure of how to finish the thought. "I know, Dad," I said, my voice softening. "I didn't want to hurt you by talking about it, but this is what I've been doing. This is what I've built. And now, Ironclad is at the top. Hawkfield was a perfect fit for what we do." "You've built all this," he muttered, almost to himself. I had no idea. I could feel the weight of his shock, his disbelief. Maybe it was a good thing he was finally learning the truth, but it wasn't the way I'd hoped it would go down. "You're still working there, right?" I asked, trying to lighten the conversation a bit. "Your job's safe, Dad." "Safe," he repeated, sounding like he was still trying to wrap his head around the rest of it. I don't know what to think about all this, but Lisa, damn." I stayed quiet, letting him process it, but I had to ask, "What's it feel like, Dad, to know that you've been working for a company that's been owned by me all this time?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, I heard him take a long breath, like he was trying to sort through the mess of his thoughts. Then finally he said, I don't know. It feels like I don't know my own daughter anymore." That hit harder than anything else he'd said, but I just nodded, even though he couldn't see it. The moment was awkward, heavy. I didn't know what else to say, so I didn't say anything at all. "Let me know when you're ready to talk more," I said, before hanging up. As I sat back in my chair, I stared at the headline on my screen again. This was real, and the hardest part was just beginning. I sat in my office, staring at the phone screen, the silence from the call still heavy in my chest. My dad hadn't said anything else, just repeated, "I don't know what to think about all this." I knew he was still trying to make sense of it, trying to fit me into the life he thought I had. It was almost noon when my phone buzzed again. This time, I didn't have to check the screen to know who it was. Dad. I took a deep breath and picked it up. "Lisa," he started, his voice quieter this time, like he was still figuring out what to say. I I just read the press release. Ironclad. It's all over the place. Your name's in it. CEO. What the hell is this? I felt the lump in my throat, but I swallowed it down. Dad, it's the truth. It's everything I've been trying to tell you. It's not just a warehouse job. I'm the founder of Ironclad. There was a long pause. I could almost hear him flipping through the press release, the words not sinking in. "So, you're telling me," he said slowly, "that this company, Ironclad, it's yours? You built it?" I nodded, even though he couldn't see it. "Yes, Dad. I started it 12 years ago. It wasn't easy, but I built it from the ground up. I worked nights and weekends, used every job I had before this to learn the business. The dispatcher job, the warehouse gig, all of it was part of the plan." The silence on the other end was deafening. I knew he wasn't expecting this. None of them were. "Lisa, you always said you were just answering phones," he said, almost sounding like he was trying to convince himself. I thought you were just playing it safe." "I was playing it smart, Dad," I said, my voice tightening. "I couldn't tell you everything then. You never listened, you never believed me when I tried to explain. You dismissed it, remember? Told me to stick with the warehouse job, that it was a steady gig." "Steady?" His voice cracked, the word barely coming out. "You own a multi-billion-dollar company, and I thought you were working at a warehouse." I bit my lip. The frustration was building up again, but I had to keep my cool. This wasn't the time for anger, even though I could feel it creeping up. "That's the problem, Dad. You never took me seriously. No one did. Not back then. I told you what I was doing, but it didn't fit into the life you imagined for me. You couldn't see past the warehouse job, but that was just a stepping stone. I had to build everything from the ground up." There was another long silence, and I could hear him flipping through the press release again. His breathing was heavier now, like he was trying to process everything. Finally, he spoke again, this time in a quieter, more defeated tone. "So, how much is it worth? This company of yours, Ironclad, how much is it worth?" I hesitated for just a second before answering. "It's valued at over $10 billion now. My stake. It's worth about $6.8 billion. The silence stretched out even longer this time. My dad didn't speak. I didn't push him. I just let the numbers sink in, knowing it wasn't just the size of the deal that was hard for him to understand. It was the fact that I, his daughter, had made all of it happen without him ever knowing. $6.8 billion, he whispered, like he was trying to say the number without choking on it. I don't know what to do with that." I felt a lump in my throat, but I pushed it down. I needed to get through this, for both of us. "It's real, Dad. This is real. And I did it. I didn't need a steady job or a safe route. I didn't need your approval or anyone else's. I needed to make it happen on my own." I could hear him breathe heavily on the other end. "But you—" He stopped, his voice shaky. "But you answered phones, Lisa. I thought you were just scheduling, working in a warehouse. I thought that was your life." "I haven't answered phones since 2017, Dad," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I moved on from that. I moved on from all of it." The words landed between us like a slap. My dad was still processing, but this time, he wasn't questioning me. He wasn't dismissing me. "God, Lisa," he whispered, "I had no idea. I'm sorry." The apology hit harder than anything he could have said. It wasn't the kind of apology I expected, one filled with regret for not believing in me. It was quieter, more genuine, and it felt like the first step towards something real between us. Maybe not understanding, but at least acknowledgement. "It's okay, Dad," I said softly, even though I wasn't sure if it really was. "But don't ever think I'm going back to that warehouse. Not for you, not for anyone." He didn't answer right away, but after a beat, I heard a long, deep breath on the other end of the line. "I'm proud of you, kid. I just wish I'd known." I nodded even though he couldn't see me. "I know, Dad, but now you do." I'd barely put the phone down when it rang again. This time, it was my mom. I braced myself, already knowing what was coming. She didn't believe a word of it. Not yet, anyway. Lisa? Her voice was shaky, like she thought it might be some kind of prank. Is this some kind of joke? I just read the press release and I don't understand. It says you're the CEO of a company worth billions? This is a joke, right? I let out a long breath. No, Mom. It's not a joke. It's real. It's all real. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could practically hear her brain working overtime, trying to make sense of what I'd said. I I don't. Well, if it's real, then you need to look at the article online. I'm seeing your name, Lisa. I'm seeing Ironclad and Business Insider and Forbes. Richard, look at this. I heard the rustle of paper and the sound of my dad's voice in the background. The shock in my mom's voice was undeniable. Oh my God, Richard. She's in Forbes. Ironclad is worth what? The clatter of her phone hitting the counter followed, and then her voice again, much quieter now, like she was reading every word of it. Lisa, this says you have offices in 10 cities, over 2,000 employees. How? How did you? I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my temples, trying to find the right words. I started small, Mom. I had to build it from nothing. You didn't see it, but that's what I was doing. Everything from the ground up. There was another long silence. I could hear the disbelief in her breathing, in the way she shuffled papers or whatever she was holding. But but what does this mean for Richard's job? What does this mean for your father? I let my eyes drift to the window, the city below me now feeling like a world away. His job is safe, Mom. Ironclad isn't planning any layoffs. He'll keep his role, but technically, I could fire him. I said it quickly before I had time to second-guess myself, but the words hit harder than I'd expected. I could hear her inhale sharply. What? What do you mean? I closed my eyes, fighting off the rush of guilt. What I mean is, I'm the one in charge now. The company is mine. But he's not going to lose his job. I'm not planning on changing that. We're not going to turn things upside down for him or anyone else. Mom was quiet for a long time. It was like she didn't know how to respond, or maybe she just needed time to process what I'd said. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft. Lisa, I don't know how to take this. I don't know what to think. I wasn't sure I did either. I couldn't change the fact that Ironclad was now the company that had swallowed Hawkfield, and the consequences of that would hit hard, especially for my dad. But I had no choice in the matter. This was what needed to happen. Mom, I'm not doing this to hurt anyone, I said, my voice quieter now. I'm not going to fire Dad. But you have to understand, this is my company now, my decisions. I'm not going to be anyone's little girl anymore. I'm not the one who's waiting for approval. I know you're not, sweetheart, she said, her voice softer now, but still tinged with confusion. It's just a lot to take in. I never thought I'd be hearing something like this. I could feel the shift between us already, the power dynamics, the weight of it pressing down on both of us. She wasn't sure how to navigate this new version of me, the one she never saw coming, the one who had built this empire while she thought I was just answering phones. I know, Mom, I said. I know it's a lot, but it's real. This is my life now. She didn't say much after that. The quiet hung between us, uncomfortable and thick. Finally, she spoke again, this time softer, a little less certain. I'll just need time to understand all of this. But I'm proud of you, Lisa. I am. I didn't respond right away. I wasn't sure how to take her words, but I nodded, even though she couldn't see it. Thanks, Mom, I said before hanging up. I leaned back in my chair again, letting the weight of the conversation sink in. This was it, the fallout, the moment when everything had shifted, when I wasn't just Lisa, the daughter anymore. I was the one in charge now, of the company, of my future, of everything. My dad was still processing it, and my mom, well, she was still in shock. But I was no longer waiting for their approval. I was running this show now, and things were never going to be the same. The phone rang again the next afternoon. It was Dad. I didn't need to check the caller ID and know it was him. He'd been trying to reach me since we'd last talked, but I hadn't answered. I didn't want to rush into this. I needed a moment to let it settle, to let him feel the weight of everything I'd said. Now, it was time to face it head on. Lisa? His voice cracked when he answered. I just want to say I'm sorry. I was wrong. I never believed in you, and I should have. I don't know how I missed it, how I didn't see what you were doing all these years. I leaned back in my chair, running a hand over my face. His words were heavy with regret, and I could feel the weight of them on my shoulders. But they weren't enough to fix everything. Not yet. It's okay, Dad, I said, the words coming out quieter than I intended. But things have to change now. We can't keep pretending like everything's the same. I forgive you, but I need you to understand that I'm not that person anymore. I'm not the girl who worked in the warehouse. I'm the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company, and that means I'm going to make decisions that won't always fit into your idea of what my life should be. He didn't say anything right away, just let my words hang there, like they were sinking in. I felt a knot in my stomach but pushed it down. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about everything we hadn't said over the years. I know, Lisa, he finally said, his voice quieter now. I know. I'll never make that mistake again. I'm sorry. I took a slow breath, my grip on the phone tightening. I appreciate that, but listen. No more advice unless I ask for it, okay? No more talking over me when I try to explain my job either. I'm not a receptionist, and I'm not a dispatcher. I'm a CEO, and I need you to respect that from here on out. Of course, he said quickly. Of course, I won't do that again. I paused, letting the silence stretch between us. This was the moment. The apology was there, but it was more than just words. It was a shift, a recognition that things would be different moving forward. Good, I said, feeling a little lighter. That's all I need to hear. Before I could say anything else, my mom's voice cut in. Lisa, honey, can we come visit you sometime? See your office. I mean, I've seen the photos, but it's not the same as seeing it in person. We'd love to see what you've built. I could hear the genuine curiosity in her voice, but also the hesitation. She didn't quite know what to expect anymore. They both had this image of me, this little girl who worked in a warehouse, answering phones. But that girl was long gone. I could feel the shift in them, the way they were starting to see me for who I really was. But it wasn't going to be easy. Sure, I said, my tone firm but not unkind. But on my terms, no more jokes about me being a receptionist, Mom. No more assuming I'm just working my way up. You're going to see the business, not just the office. This is who I am now. This is what I've built. I could hear her swallow, a soft gasp in the background. She wasn't expecting me to lay it out so clearly, but it was necessary. They had to get it. We understand, Lisa, Dad said, his voice steady now. And we'll do better. I promise I know you will, I said, feeling a sense of finality settle in. Just remember, this is who I am now. This is my life, my company. Mom cleared her throat. Of course, sweetie, and we're proud of you. You've done something incredible. Thanks, Mom, I said, my voice softer now. I appreciate that. There was a long pause before my dad spoke again, almost sheepishly. Can I tell people now? About what you've built? I couldn't help it. I laughed. Not a mean laugh. Just the kind that came from a place of disbelief at how far we'd come. Yeah, Dad, you can tell people, but make sure you get the details right. He chuckled, too, a nervous laugh that told me he was still trying to find his footing. I'll make sure I do. No more warehouse stories. I smiled, even though he couldn't see it. No more warehouse stories, Dad. That's the past. When we finally hung up, I sat there for a minute, staring out the window. The city below me felt like a world I was still learning how to navigate. But at least now, my family knew the truth. At least now, they could see me for who I really was. The power shift was complete, and for the first time, I felt like I could breathe. The following weekend, I made my way back to the lake house, casserole in hand, just like I had for every dinner over the past few years. But this time, everything felt different. I wasn't the same person who had driven out here in the past. Quiet, unsure, playing the part they expected me to. Now, I was walking into the same house, but the roles had shifted. I wasn't the failure anymore. I didn't feel small anymore. When I stepped inside, the atmosphere was quieter than usual. My mom was in the kitchen, bustling around like she didn't know what to say, and Dad was sitting on the couch, his hands folded in front of him. The usual noise from Eric and Claire was absent, replaced by a kind of awkward tension hanging in the air. Eric broke the silence first, pulling me aside when I set the casserole down. He glanced around, his eyes a little wary, as if he wasn't sure where to start. So, how did you end up in the tech side of logistics? He asked, his voice a mix of curiosity and respect, like he wasn't sure what to make of this new version of me. I took a breath, surprised by the directness of the question, but I wasn't going to hold back now. It wasn't a straight line, I said, setting my coat down and leaning against the counter. Started in the warehouse, sure, but I saw where the inefficiencies were. I saw how technology could fix a lot of the old systems. So, I started learning it. Slowly. Took some courses on the side, made connections in the industry. It just made sense. Damn, Eric said, nodding slowly. That's impressive. You just went after it. I didn't know how to explain the loneliness of those years, working in the shadows, pretending I was just another cog in the machine when all I wanted was to build something of my own. But I didn't need to. Eric got it, at least. Claire came up a minute later, just as curious but still with that sharp, analytical edge. What's it like managing over 2,000 employees? She asked, tapping her fingers on her wine glass like she was mentally making notes. I smiled, a little proud of the shift in her tone. It's challenging, sure, but it's also rewarding. You have to get the right people in the right positions, make sure the whole operation is running smoothly. It's not just about the software, it's about managing the human side of things too. Claire seemed impressed, but there was still a touch of the lawyer in her, always analyzing, always looking for the next angle. Have you considered talking to someone at your law firm? Someone to help you scale things even further? I shrugged casually. Actually, they're already on retainer. We've got the legal side covered. My firm's been advising us on everything from contracts to mergers for years now. Her eyebrows shot up, and I could see the shift in her eyes, the realization that I wasn't the person she thought I was anymore, that I wasn't some small-time player in a game that had nothing to do with her world. The dinner went on, quieter this time, filled with small talk and curious questions about Ironclad and the future. No one mentioned my warehouse job or suggested I should look into a local government gig. There was no, maybe you should try the post office, or when are you going back to school? It was different now. The power dynamics had shifted, even if they didn't fully understand it yet. When dinner was done, I stood up to leave. Eric and Claire were still sitting at the table, looking at me with a new respect. But it was Dad who got up first. He came over, his expression soft, his voice quieter than usual. Lisa, he said, his voice a little rough, like he was still coming to terms with everything. I just want to say, I'm proud of you. I don't think I've ever said that, but I am. You've done something incredible. I blinked, the words hitting me harder than I expected. I was used to hearing him criticize, offer advice, tell me where I was going wrong. To hear him say he was proud, really proud, was something I didn't even know I'd been waiting for. I nodded, fighting back the sudden lump in my throat. Thanks, Dad. He pulled me into a hug, awkward but sincere. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was a disappointment. For the first time, I felt like he finally saw me for who I really was. I'm proud of you, kid, he said again, his voice rough but real. As I stepped back, grabbing my coat and preparing to leave, I couldn't help but feel like this was the first real shift, not just in my life, but in how they saw me. This time, there were no assumptions, no jokes about the past. And as I walked out the door, I knew I was stepping into a new chapter, one where I wasn't just trying to prove myself, I had already done it.